Open your mind.
Hello and welcome to Open Your Mind Radio. You have myself, Alan James.
Myself, Stephen George. Good evening.
Good evening. It's Sunday the 27th of November 2016 and we're coming up to the Christmas and everybody's getting the things, getting the trees and the cards and everything else organised. It seems to be getting earlier every year. What do you think, Steve?
Well, I've actually seen a lot of Christmas decorations up since the middle of last week. And I'm not talking about like the stores and the shops. I'm talking about like houses, homes, dwellings. Yeah. It's just way too early, I'm sorry.
My tree is up in the attic where it bloody well should be until the start of December. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay.
I like that. I must use that. My tree's up in the attic.
Okay, we have two guests on the show tonight. Our first guest is a chap called Richard Sauder, and our second guest is Tony Gosling. We'll be bringing Richard on in a few minutes. As usual, we have a few things to talk about, but before we do that, let's find out what the communication channels are.
Okay, communication channels are... Excuse me?
The communication channels are email info@oymireland.com, by phone 046 927 1212, and you can also contact us direct through the OYM chat room.
Yes, the phone number again, 046 927 1212, if you'd like to make a phone call during the show and to ask a question to either of our guests. We also have the website, OYMradio.com. On the website there you will find all the usual links to the anti-social media Facebook, to Twitter and Skype and all sorts of things, and the email as well. Actually, if you want to send us an email, as I've said before previously, no matter where you are, if you're listening to the show either live or on the podcast, if you want to just send us a quick email, quick one-line email just to say hi, let us know that you heard the show and where you're tuned in from. It gives us that real fuzzy, warm feeling, makes us feel less alone in the world. What else? We have the chat room on the website, OYMradio.com. We also have the chat room on peoplesinternetradio.com. Also, we're going to be monitoring both of those for questions. So a big hi to everyone who's already in the chat room. It's a great bunch of people. And what else? We have the TuneIn Radio application. That's a free application for your smartphone or your iPhone or any of those devices where you can get us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Alan.
Right, Steve, back to you.
Oh, we're playing tennis. Right,
tennis.
Back to me. We just recently had, I'm sure everyone across the world has recently just had Black Friday, where a load of people are buying crap that they do not want, and maybe aggressively having to have a go at another for the same item. I mean, yeah, we've seen this before where people are they're hustling and bustling through shop doors and they're fighting other members of the public just to get something that, you know, that looks like it has 10% or 20% or 50% reduction, when in fact we've already it's been proven over here in Ireland. One of our stores that shall remain nameless. We don't want to be naming and shaming, but we'll just call them we'll call it Leroy Norman.
Oh, right.
Leroy Norman was selling some furniture, and seemingly before the Black Friday he had the furniture at a particular price, and then he ramped up the price, and then Black Friday reduced the price back down to the original price, and he was caught doing this. So the proverbial excrement is hitting the fan there in relation to Leroy Normans. So I mean, Black Friday, we've seen so many people do this where you think you're getting a great deal, and you know, on some items there are deals to be had, but unfortunately it's usually end of line stuff that they just want to get rid of and would probably reduce anyway. But like when you explain the concept of Black Friday to people, you say you do realise like that, you know, the price was, you know, it has crept up, and now it's just gone back to the original price, and you think you're getting a deal, and you're going in buying two of them. But most people they won't be told. They will not be told. So fair play to whoever invented this concept. It's absolutely fantastic. A great PR marketing tool. So Black Friday. And what have we got tomorrow? We have Cyber Monday. Seemingly anything that didn't sell on Black Friday, they're gonna get rid of it on Cyber Monday. So yes, Cyber Monday coming to a PC near you real soon.
Plus the fact that on Facebook I've seen our American cousins talking about Thanksgiving. So they had Thanksgiving for everything that they have, and they appreciate what they have, and then the next day they go out and do all the Black Friday thing. It's unbelievable, and how people get tied in. And now, if you've seen people fighting in the stores for 20% discount or whatever on a TV, imagine if they had no food. What it would be like. It would be just mayhem. So just bear that in mind to the people who want to prep or have a bit of food back, and back up just in case. Now, as you probably all guessed, with the whole Trump debacle that went on in America and the selection as opposed to the election with Hillary and Trump, the mainstream media have been caught out hand over fist. The amount of times they've been caught with all these fake stories and fake news, and they're all backpedaling now, and they're basically crapping themselves. And to be honest with you, it's about time. People are beginning to wake up en masse to see the fake news on a daily basis, and people are reporting it more and more and more. But the problem is that they seem to have all migrated to YouTube. I came across three separate channels on YouTube today that had the exact same story on it. So it's all this clickbait or fake news. And there was an interview by some chap who's in Macedonia. He's a young guy. And he said, yeah, we set up all these channels and we make up these, fake news and everything else because we do it for clickbait, and it all looks legit. It looks really, really, good, and websites as well. So I think what might happen, and just is just my opinion, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but the mainstream media, there's a big push on now saying close down alternative news because it's all fake news, etc., because they know they've been rumbled. So I reckon they'll saturate the internet with all fake news and then blame the alternative media, and then there'll be a big cull on for the alternative media, and they'll just point the finger. Maybe not, maybe it will happen, maybe it won't, I don't know, but I just can see something like that happening. So watch out for your fake news. If anything, more than ever today, just when you hear a story, just don't believe it until there's some kind of evidence or backup with it. We have been caught out a couple of times. We're happy to put our hand in the air and say that we thought it was coming from a reliable source, and it didn't. When you look into it, it didn't. So they hadn't done the backup. They hadn't done the background checks on some information. So, I think it's important that we need to use a lot of discernment when we're hearing things on the internet and look at videos. And if you know a channel that you like, just subscribe to that channel and go direct to that channel, because people are taking information from certain channels and putting them on their own channels for clickbait, and that's kind of destroying YouTube. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but just be aware of that anyway.
So, go to our YouTube channel, because that's where the real news is.
That's where you'll find the real news.
Absolutely.
Right.
And actually, also, Google are jumping on the bandwagon as well, seemingly. This is something that I've heard recently. I don't know if it's an algorithm or exactly what the story is, but seemingly, anyone who's going to be searching for something, a newsworthy item, Google are, what they're going to do is anything that they deem to be either fake news, conspiracy, alternative, it's not going to show up in search engines, and if it does, it's going to be on way down the pecking order. Only news from obviously the mainstream is actually going to be on the high-ranking pages, as we call them, in Google. So I suppose other search engines will follow that kind of thought process as well. And there is another browser that we've used from time to time called Start Page. Start Page is normally good. It doesn't track you and all this sort of stuff. Unfortunately, they actually pull a lot of their information from Google, so it will follow through obviously to Start Page as well. So it might be harder to actually find what you're looking for. You may have to trawl through a lot of information on the internet. But as Alan says, and as I say too, our YouTube channel, whatever we stick up on that, it's normally kind of checked and double checked, and again, we're not saying we're infallible either. So discernment. Anyway, newstalk.com. Newstalk is a radio station in Ireland, I believe it's owned by Mr. Dennis O'Brien. I could be wrong, but I think it is. And the latest opinion poll on newstalk.com says that Fine Gael are regaining the position as the most popular political party in Ireland. I should have had a jingle ready for a crowd laughing and booing and jeering.
Well, there's a toilet jingle there. You can
Is there?
flush you down the toilet.
Okay, let's just flush that one right down the toilet. Okay.
No.
That wasn't it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It's there somewhere.
Everyone knows what a toilet sounds like. But yeah, so there's supposed to be the regaining popularity. I fail to see how, because anyone who follows the Irish political saga will know that Edna Kenny, he's not very popular. He's not very popular with the people of Ireland. Hell, he's not even popular with people in his own party and the whole political system. So how they are regaining popularity, it beggars belief. But then again, it's just PR. That's all it is, because as we all know, a lot of these stations are mouthpieces for the government. So basically, they're told, everyone knows this, they're told, just read out that story. The story is read out on the hour, every hour, and then on the half hour, until everybody believes it. And then people will be having conversations with their friends. Well, see, Fine Gael are regaining popularity. Really, are they? Yes. And it's a topic of conversation. Everybody the sheeple will believe it. So, look, leave them to it.
How's your week?
I'm glad you asked.
Oh, wow. How many? That's about 5 pages there, I think. Poor Richard's going to be hanging around for a while then.
No, just one story.
Oh, okay.
It's just because I couldn't remember some of the facts in the story that I heard recently. It's in relation to something that was on the Daily Mail, .co.uk. And this is one for all the vegetarians. Do vegetarians live longer than carnivores? Well, a biology lecturer from Aston University in Birmingham, James Brown, and not the singer, because he's dead, he says yes, science is mixed and unclear, but according to the studies that he has done, people who kind of just stay clear of the meat and eat a totally vegetarian diet do seem to live longer. He said sticking to meat-free diet can help prevent early mortality, is what he says. The study looked at 100,000 Americans over a 5-year period, and he said meat eating has been linked to high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and some forms of cancer. Now, I'm not scaremongering. Stop before people start ringing in, and I'm not scaremongering. I'm just saying that's what the study has shown. He does say in the study, he is aware that, over the 5-year period, people could have changed lifestyles whereby they were getting more exercise, getting less exercise, but just on a whole, he says the study showed that a vegetarian diet was better if you want to live longer. Now, he's also saying if you want to eat meat, avoid the GMOs, eat only grass-fed meats, and avoid pesticides. Well, unfortunately, in this day and age, it's very hard to avoid pesticides because they are absolutely everywhere. So I suppose the only thing you can do is maybe, I don't know, get your own cow, raise it on the grass, and kill it yourself.
That's it. All the poisons, in the
Can't get rid of them. There we go. That's it.
Okay,
how's your week?
Just a couple of things because we have to bring Richard in. As we said earlier about the mainstream media, we need to make them redundant. We need to switch off the mainstream media. Just switch it off. Don't watch TV. If you're going to watch TV, watch programs you enjoy. Don't listen to all the news and all the crap that they have and the propaganda. Basically, what I've been looking at during the week are internet radios. And the one that we put it up on our wish list, and maybe we'll get around to getting it. It's called a Hammer IR110. And the reason why we like it is because it has an RJ45. So although it's Wi-Fi, it actually has a RJ45 port, so you can hardwire that to your network. It has auxiliary port, headphones, USB. And I rang the company who are in Germany, and I said to them, can you put in your own stream if it's not on your list? And they said, yes, you can do that with the radio, which is what obviously you'd want to do, because I'm not saying OYM is on their list of radio stations, and we will try and get our name on there, but at the moment it's probably not there. So you want to be able to put in your own radio stream. But we put that on the wish list. So just to say, if everybody went to internet radios, then you could hear all the radio stations you want on the internet, and you wouldn't have to listen to the mainstream radio shows or TVs. So, and we'd like to get one of them, and we will eventually, hopefully, and we will test it and do a video tutorial and show people how it works and what to do and all that kind of stuff. Because I think internet radio is still new for people. And I know people talk about DAB, the digital radio, but digital radio is different because it's not, you can't connect to internet radios, although some radios might have both facilities. And the last thing on the list is just a thank you to a listener called Adam. Adam is a long-time listener and a supporter of OYM. And he's basically going to arrange for us to get a thing called a Q device, which is like a MagGrav device, like the Kesh MagGrav device. And he's going to be either sending them over, or when he comes off to Ireland, he's going to bring them over with him. And basically the idea will be that you plug it in. The Q device is a bit different. It's more up-to-date than the MagGrav. You plug it in, and then you put a load on it like a fridge or something. And it should nano-coat your cabling in your house. And over a period of time, reduces your electricity consumption or your power consumption in the house. That's the plan of attack anyway. And we had a Skype call with James, the engineer who builds these, on Friday. Myself and Steve were talking to him. He's in Switzerland. And we had a good talk to him. So if we get one again, we'll do a video tutorial, show you the device, and we'll take it from there. And that's the plan of attack. Right, we're going to get our guest on. Our guest is Richard Sauder, and Steve is going to give us a quick bio on Richard's background, and then we'll get Richard on.
Yes, I love the way you just. I should have been ready actually. Should have been ready with the bio. Anyway,
just can't get the stuff.
That's the pay. It's the pay.
I know, yeah, it is the pay. Yeah.
Anyway, Richard Sauder is a native Virginian with an abiding interest in Fortina. Whatever that is, we will find out. Unusual information and anomalies, paradigm-busting data of all variables. Beginning in early childhood, he has experienced first-hand contact with a variety of paranormal phenomena that have left him a bit puzzled, flummoxed, and thoroughly persuaded that there is much more to the Earth and to human perception and consciousness than the mainstream American culture believes. Some of Richard's favourite research and reading interests are underground and underwater bases and tunnels, electronic mind control, freedom technology, UFOs, human prehistory and remote antiquity, international politics, the Kundalini energy, South American shamanism and alternative thought patterns. Quite a lot on that list.
Quite a lot. Good evening, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you. How are you?
Not too bad at all. God, the voice sounds a bit low there. Are you okay? You have a sore throat?
Yes.
Oh,
I'm just fine.
Okay, no, that's fine. Richard, an awful lot on your bio there, and I know you recently did an interview with Richie Allen on the Richie Allen Show. But basically, we were going to bring you on to talk about what you think is happening at the moment and the status on the planet with the selection, as we mentioned earlier, with Trump and Hillary, and what's happening regarding climate change. Some people are saying it's all a scam, and whether it's real, and what's basically happening on a global level. So is there anything you want to add to your bio, or will we get stuck into the subject matter?
Well, the word you had a little trouble with is Fortiana. Fortiana is a field of study developed from the body of work of Charles Fort. Charles Fort was a prodigious researcher and writer from the early 20th century in the United States. Charles Fort went to the library in a major way and combed through decades, a century or more of newspapers, scientific journals, popular journals, every variety of literature that there is, to come up with a lengthy and ever lengthening list of anomalous events that occur, such as tons of live fish falling out of a clear blue sky and things like that, or frogs, anomalous events involving UFOs and weather phenomena, that type of thing. He wrote a series of books, one of which was Low, the Book of the Damned, and a number of books which you can get. They make for very informative reading. In the whole, what they reveal is that we really do not understand this planet that we live on, and we really do not understand what is going on this planet, notwithstanding that most people automatically assume that they do.
Okay. And tell us, what's your take on, because you're in Ecuador at the moment, and
Yes.
what's your take
Well,
on
I've
what...
been here for years.
Okay. And what's your take on what's going on globally regarding climate change, regarding the chemtrails? And, there's an awful lot from a cataclysmic point of view happening with flooding. There's, volcanoes becoming active, which have been dormant for hundreds of years, thousands of years. And there's tectonic plate movements going on as well. What do you think is going on?
The Earth is a very dynamic planet and has been for hundreds of millions and billions of years. We live on a planet that has a very thin, seemingly solid crust, floating on miles and endless miles of magma and molten rock that just go down and down and down. The reality is that this seemingly solid crust is lighter. It's as if we were on a balsa raft floating at sea, only we're floating on a molten sea that's a couple of thousand degrees Fahrenheit hot or more. So the planet is inherently unstable from the standpoint of the denizens of the surface of the crust, which would be us. And from time to time, these balsa rafts, which represent the continents, have collisions, albeit very slow, but because these balsa rafts, called continents, are so extremely large and heavy, the collisions cause massive earthquakes and also occasion volcanoes as the land masses shift and change their position. Even a slight bit is enough to result in tremendous tectonic strain and seismic activity and volcanic activity. So that's what's going on. It's been going on for hundreds of millions, if not billions of years, and will continue to occur for the foreseeable distant future. So you have to understand that the planet is inherently unstable. It's inherently geologically dynamic, and that's the way it is. Now, as for the changing weather, yes, the climate is changing. We could argue the causes all day long, but it is changing. Anyone who observes the weather sees that there have been a lot of unusual and powerful and damaging weather events over the last few decades, and increasingly so in recent years, with droughts, floods, and tornadoes, etc., on scales in some cases that we haven't seen in recent history. Now, one of the things that I'm watching is the methane, the frozen methane, in the polar regions and the near polar regions, especially in the northern hemisphere, in the tundra, in the taiga of Canada, Alaska, and the northern Nordic countries and Russia, in the Siberian region, there are gigatons of frozen methane tied up in various different types of substances, oftentimes called methane clathrates. These are in the sediment in the northern seas and also in the subsoil, in the tundra and in northern forests in the regions I've just described. The issue is that the Arctic and subarctic region has enjoyed much warmer temperatures in recent years than has been the norm in the recent historical past. What that means is, as the tundra and the subsoil begins to warm and melt down, this methane can sublimate and go directly to the atmosphere if it's in the seafloor. For example, the Arctic Ocean is very shallow, much shallower than the Gulf of Mexico or the Mediterranean Sea or the Atlantic Ocean or the or the Pacific Ocean. The Arctic Ocean is shallow, like the North Sea or the Baltic Sea. So as the temperature warms, relatively speaking, in the North Polar region and subpolar region, this methane is beginning to bubble off, to sublimate, and come up either through the sea or up through the soil, through the permafrost, and into the atmosphere. This matters because there are so many gigatons of it there. And as the temperature warms, the danger is that a threshold will be crossed in which, in a very short period of time, many gigatons of methane clethorates will sublimate from a frozen form to a gaseous form and just bubble off into the atmosphere in massive amounts. Now, that can affect the jet streams tremendously, and in fact already is. The jet streams in the northern regions are way out of their historical paths, such that, let's give the example of the United States in recent years. The so-called polar vortex has moved down from the polar region in recent years in the wintertime into the United States, north central region of the continental United States, into the northeastern region of the United States. What that means is the really frigid polar air masses that would normally be in the polar region slide south by 1,000 or a couple thousand miles, meaning that if the cold air is not at the North Pole or in the near polar region, what is there? And the answer is warmer air than usual.
Well, funny enough, you should talk about... I was just saying, Richard, funny enough, you should talk about the Gulf Stream, because there was... I was listening to John Moore on his radio show there a couple of weeks ago, and he believes, or he's been told, that the Gulf Stream has actually stopped.
Well, I wasn't talking about the Gulf Stream. I was talking about the jet streams.
Okay.
The jet streams are in upper atmosphere, and they circumambulate or circumnavigate the Earth thousands of feet up at very high rate of speed. But the jet streams are out of the normal path and have been for some time. The Gulf Stream, which comes out of the Gulf of Mexico and goes up off the eastern seaboard of North America and then cuts diagonally across the North Atlantic Ocean over towards the British Isles and Northern Europe, is also not behaving as it normally has for centuries. I don't know if it's absolutely stopped, but what has happened is that I think at the surface layers, it's not behaving as it did in the past. At deeper layers of the ocean, going down hundreds of thousands of feet, you still have a great deal of warm water moving into the Arctic region in the strait between Greenland, going up past Greenland, north of Iceland, and west of Norway and up into the Arctic Ocean. That water in recent years, including this year, has been warmer than normal because the ocean off of eastern North America in recent years, including this present year, has been warmer than normal, farther north than normal. So the water has been slowly moving up into the Arctic Ocean, meaning that the water in the Arctic Ocean has been appreciably warmer than normal. That directly influences the ice cap in the Arctic region, which is, even to this present day here in late November, lesser in extent than it has been historically in recent decades, and also thinner. There still is ice, but not as much. The danger there is that as the ice cap declines and gets smaller and covers less of the Arctic Ocean for more of the year, there is more solar energy coming in that will be absorbed by the Arctic Ocean. You see, if there's ice cover, even if it's thin ice cover, the sun's rays do not go directly to the water, But when you don't have ice, not even thin ice, the sun's radiation, the thermal energy coming in from the sun, does not have to melt any ice at all. Instead, it goes directly into the water and dramatically warms it. Water without ice warms up far more rapidly than water with ice. Once the ice is gone, then the water melts much more rapidly, and the Arctic region is a driver for global weather through the jet streams that cycle around the Earth at a very high rate of speed at hundreds of miles per hour, but they're way up there, usually tens of thousands of feet in the atmosphere. So all of that is changing, you see, and people argue about that. At the end of the day, it doesn't much matter what is causing it. What does matter is that the situation is changing in the Arctic, and it has real implications, not just for oceanography, but for meteorology in more southern latitudes, like, say, the British Isles, North America, Europe,
what can we do?
etc.
What can we do about it, Richard? Because I know we had a quick chat
Maybe
before we went
nothing.
live. I mean,
maybe nothing.
Because you said a lot of people are probably waiting for, whoever the governments to do something about it. But maybe it's down to
nothing
ourselves.
is the answer.
Yeah.
Well, I just answered your question.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can do nothing. If you're standing at the seashore, as people were with the Banda Aceh earthquake and tsunami, was that 2004, something like that?
Yeah, Christmas 2004.
People were standing on the sea. Yes, people were standing on the seashore, and if you're faced with a 60-foot wall of water moving your way, if you are standing there and it's 100 yards away from you, you know what, my friend? There's nothing you can do. You are going to die. And people did die by the hundreds of thousands. Similarly, with the big earthquake and tsunami in Japan in 2011, if you're in a situation where you're down on the seashore and that big tsunami is coming in, I believe at places it was upward of 100 feet high, and you're standing there and you see a big wall of water coming towards you, and you call on your cell phone to your friend, what can I do to help myself out of this situation? The answer is, in that situation, nothing. You are going to die in the next 20 seconds. And thousands of people did die on that occasion. So the short answer I'm giving you is, sometimes events are so large and so wide in scale and scope that you personally cannot change them. We may be facing such a situation. Let's step back a little more and look at the worldwide die-off of wildlife. Biological scientists are now saying that between 1970 and the year 2020, which is 3 years from now, that 2/3 of all of the wildlife on this planet will have died. So at this point, we're at like 65%. Over the next 3 years, another 1.5% basically are going to die. Now that means, prorating that rate of death of wildlife, that there would be 25 years left for the other 1/3 of all of the wildlife on this planet to die. Well, I'm telling you, the other 1/3 will go far faster than the first 2/3. And we, in reality, will not take 25 years to die. In other words, we, as a human species, are likely looking at a catastrophic event horizon. It's not 25 years out. It may not even be 20 years out, maybe not even 15. It's multifaceted. It's coming up fast. It is huge. It is planet-wide. And I'm suggesting to you that it's awfully late, after centuries of destruction of the natural order, after way overbreeding and way overconsuming, to say, oh, look, it looks like we're in huge trouble, and we may not make it another 25 years. What should we do? And the answer is, maybe the real question is, what should we have done that we didn't do, that now may be too late to correct? In other words, it's the OF moment.
So can I just jump in there?
Down.
Can I just say that obviously
Yes.
you know about the underground bases, and obviously is this why the elites are doing this? They're prepping because they know what's coming down the line.
Well, because they've played a huge role in the things that are coming. Yes, to that would be one of the reasons. During the course of my research, and for those of your listeners who don't know, I've written a little series of 3 paperback books for the popular press, for the popular market, that are available on my website, which is eventhorizon.blogspot.com. That's eventhorizon.blogspot.com. And in the right-hand sidebar, people can click on the book covers and order my books. Now, in those books, I do talk extensively about the so-called underground bases, some of which are known, but I believe most of which are not. They're all over the place. There's certainly underground facilities in the British Isles. There are undersea facilities. There are secret tunnels. Lord knows these facilities are in the United States. They're in many countries, Russia, China, and on, Australia, et cetera. Now, in one of the interviews I had with an insider, whose name I dare not mention, but he worked at a very high level of this in this policy area for years, I asked him that question, what are the bases being made for? And he said, well, there's a variety of reasons. Some of them are obvious. Command, control, and communication facilities. Some of them store weapons, including nuclear weapons and other weapons. Some of them are government document repositories, climate control repositories, etc. But he said, some of the contingencies that the planners at the high levels of governments and military institutions are aware of are, number one, certainly they're aware of the possibility of destructive nuclear war, because they themselves for decades have been planning for and preparing for nuclear war. So of course they know of the danger of nuclear war. If one occurs, it will be they themselves who conduct that war. So that's one reason. Another reason is the possibility of precipitous, abrupt climate change. Climatologists now understand that ice ages can come on with startling rapidity, even within 10 years or less, a year or two, and you can be the global thermostat flips and fast, and you just move into an ice age. It starts snowing one winter, and spring doesn't come. It keeps snowing, and before you know it, you got 10, 20, 30 feet of snow, and the trees don't bud, the flowers don't bloom, because they're all covered with snow and ice. And for a long time, scientists thought that ice ages took centuries or thousands of years to develop. Now they realize that one year it just starts snowing, and it snows and snows for the next 86,000 years. So these planners at the high levels of governments and military agencies now understand that you can have abrupt climate changes within a very short period of time. That would be another factor. They also understand that we, so to speak, our solar system is like a pool table or billiards table, in which you can have large rogue space rocks that from time to time will just come whistling through at a high rate of speed. They can either impact the Earth or other planets, or come so close that they can destabilize the Earth geologically and geophysically, maybe cause enormous earthquakes, volcanoes, or cause the Earth to shift on its axis. Those are some of the kinds of things that were mentioned to me. So these sorts of events are not discussed much and not very openly with the hoi polloi, with the proverbial man and woman in the street, but they are certainly aware of it at the upper levels, the Pentagon, the CIA, NATO, NASA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and the equivalent agencies, you know, in England and in the UK, in Europe, China, Russia. They know about these things.
So tell us.
Yes, that's one of the reasons.
Okay, well, we have about 10 minutes left or so. Tell us, is there any good things, any good news, or anything that we can actually do now? Is that possible?
What I see happening that encourages me is there are a growing number of people who seem to be widening their mental and spiritual horizons, deepening their knowledge and understanding, not only of themselves, but of humanity and of the planet and the larger universe in general. That said, the great unwashed masses of humanity, the vast bulk of the human race, still remains very ignorant, and in many cases very smugly ignorant, very happily ignorant. You know, sometimes terrible things happen on a wide scale, and most people go by it. Genetic scientists know that about 70,000 years ago or so, there was a great catastrophic event that happened on this planet, and all but about 4,000 or 5,000 human beings died. They know when they look back in the human genome that there's a terrific bottleneck event that happened several tens of thousands of years ago on this planet, and globally, the estimates I've read are in the nature of whatever happened, 4,000 to 5,000 human beings, Homo sapiens, survived, and we're all the descendant of that small group of people, whether it was one band of people in one place, or let's say 10 different bands of 400 in 10 dispersed regions of the planet, we really don't know. But there was a huge event on this planet in our remote antiquity, and it killed most of us. So what I'm telling you is, you know, it's all well and good to whistle past the graveyard and say, well, we'll think positively and wish for the best, understanding that scientists know that in the past, huge, horrific events have happened on this planet, and most of humanity went bye-bye. Now, we now have the technology to do that at our own hand. And if events continue in the direction they are presently trending, we may very well have a human extinction or near extinction event before this century is out, and even perhaps before the year 2050. I am telling you soberly that our situation is just that problematic, and the Queen of England ain't going to change it. She's one of the agents of this dire situation. The President of the United States, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, et cetera, et cetera. They're not going to stop this. If our situation changes, it will only be because very large numbers of individual human beings, and here I'm not talking about thousands or even millions. I'm telling you that only and unless billions of individual human beings greatly elevate their consciousness, not in the far-flung future, in the very near future, we may not make it out of this century. That's the simple truth.
So we need to basically wake up to what's going on and put plans in place as best we can, really. I mean, we can't control the underground bases or do anything like that, but we can kind of look at what we're doing from a day-to-day point of view. I mean, the movie...
Well, you can stop paying taxes to NATO. You can stop paying taxes to the United Kingdom. You can stop paying taxes to the government of the United States, because the governments, in many respects, are causing so many of these problems. You can stop supporting the big multinational corporations and the consumer culture, because the global consumer lifestyle is causing so much destruction. You can plant trees, my friend. Any individual who lives in a rural or semi-rural region can plant trees and ground cover like wildflowers, vines and sedges and so forth, because the natural environment is disappearing. The loss of natural habitat means all of these little Tweety birds, which were prevalent by the millions when I was a kid. I'm 61 years old now. When I was a boy, I can remember the profusion of songbirds in the spring, the profusion of honeybees and bumblebees and butterflies. 2/3 of that is gone now, my man. It's gone. Most of those is gone. I've been struck now as I walk out in nature, even here in South America, by how few butterflies there are, how few bumblebees and honeybees there are, how many little Tweety birds. So there are far fewer songbirds, because we destroyed the natural habitat, the natural environment. And it's even worse in the seas. There are like 10% of the fish in the world's oceans that they were when I was a small boy. But you see, I'm explaining to you what's happened just in one man's lifetime. We're on a planet that is dying. We're killing it.
Yeah.
And if we are to survive, we've got to bring back nature. I'm telling you, plant trees, plant wildflowers, put out some bird seed for the wild birds, some suet in the wintertime. Don't eat fish. Stop eating fish that come from the ocean, because the oceans are way overfished. And if people keep eating their fish sticks and their crab legs and their clams and the oysters, it's over. It's just done. It's over. And I'm not talking about thousands of years from now or 100 years from now. I mean, in most of the lifetimes of the people listening to this program, we're done unless we massively change the way we live and the way we think.
Have you ever seen the movie? Have you ever seen the movie Soylent Green from the 1970s?
Yes, when I was younger.
Yeah, because we were
yes.
actually told about that, and basically, that's probably where we're going to be going if we keep doing what we're doing.
No, that's you see, that's the rosy scenario.
Mm.
That's not the grim scenario. That's the good scenario, because what I'm telling you is the biosphere is dying on this planet. It's being killed in 100 different ways. Mm. And if the biosphere dies, we die because we are part of the biosphere.
Yeah.
And as of now, the biosphere is dying. Let me tell you, from conservation biologists and population biologists understand something about species extinction. It's strange but true that when a species, any species, gets down to a certain number of breeding adults, sexually mature adults, you may see a population of, bison or whatever. You can say, oh, look, there's 5,000 of them left. We'll help them come back. What can happen, and frequently does, is all of a sudden they all die within 1 or 2 years. It's as if the spark goes out and they all just flop over dead one way or another within a very short period of time. Mm. Conservation biologists have observed this countless times. What I'm telling you is there comes an event when something happens in a species environment and the whole species just goes extinct in a short period of time. In our case, we, in our wisdom, have built hundreds of nuclear power plants all over the world. Now, the issue there is nuclear power plants produce tons, thousands of tons, millions of tons even of nuclear waste, which is radioactive. We, in our wisdom, have also produced nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles, etc., etc. We cannot survive a radioactive planet. Since the start of the nuclear age back in the 1940s, the planet has been getting more and more and more radioactive.
Well, we have...
Unless that is not just...
We have Fukushima. Richard, we're going to have to wrap things up. Unfortunately, we got to that time, and we'd like to carry on. I think this is going to be a part 2 in the interview to talk about. But do you want to give us a quick synopsis on what, from a positive point of view, just reiterate what you just said there, what people need to do before we wrap things up?
Only. We don't have a positive future unless we massively and dramatically change our way of thinking and our way of living and massively elevate our level of understanding, our level of awareness as a species in a very short time span within the very near future. Because if things continue as they are, we are done, my friend.
Yeah. No, well, that's fair enough. I think that's fair enough to say. Well, listen, Richard, thanks for coming on the show and talking about that. I'm sorry that it's a short interview, but we have another guest to bring on next few minutes. But again, a big thank you for coming on, and we're going to pass you off to Steve. Steve's going to get all your contact details, where people can find you, where they can look you up, and they can check your website. Steve.
Yeah, it's fascinating information, Richard. It really is. I'm sitting here thinking that we're doomed, and there's a lot of people in the chat room there, and they're all kind of wondering what can we do. But I mean, obviously, you've given us some information there. It is a lot to digest, and there's the fact that it could be imminent and not something that's going to be 50, 60, or 100 years away.
Well, it is imminent. There's no could be to it. It is imminent.
Yeah.
Plant some trees. Stop eating fish from the oceans.
Right, okay. Richard, where can people find out more information? I know you have a website you want to throw out there, and you want to give the book a plug as well.
EventHorizonChronicle.blogspot.com. That's EventHorizonChronicle.blogspot.com. My books are available on that website. And if people want to get out of the British Isles, want to get out of Europe, want to get out of North America, have the money to relocate to another country, and the spirit to start a life in South America, contact me. My email is on my website, and I'll put you in touch with people that can help you move. Serious inquiries only, please.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. Much appreciated, Richard. We're just putting the information on your website on the chat rooms there, so people can find you. All right, Richard, just stay with us there for a minute. We're just going to go off to a musical break. We'll be back after this.
This is Open Your Mind Radio on OYMradio.com, UnitedWeStrike.com, and PeoplesInternetRadio.com.
Okay, we're back. Some great information there from Richard Saunders, our first guest this evening. It's very thought-provoking stuff. Again, not for the faint-hearted or the squeamish. But as he said, there is a positive side, albeit a small one. But definitely good information.
And can I just add to that? I mean, I think we can all see what's going on globally. You'd want to be definitely wearing rose-tinted glasses not to see what's going on regarding the environment and what's happening. So, have your own take on it, do your own research, but, we can see what's happening. So I do think we have to do something about it. Something has to be done about it quite soon. Right, so our next guest is a chap called Tony Gosling. Tony has worked for the BBC, and he has a big background in different areas. So we're going to bring Tony in, and Tony's going to give some information about what he's done, and then we're going to get stuck into talking about everything and anything. Good evening, Tony. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks. Thanks very much for having me on.
No problem, Tony. Listen, Tony, thanks for coming on the show. And we know you have a very varied background, but definitely working for the BBC was the big interest to us to have you on talking about that. So before we get stuck into talking about the BBC and what's been going on there, do you want to give us a bit of a background, just to let listeners know what you have done in your career?
Okay, well, I started off in the aviation business, basically. In the family business, working in that for a while, but kind of got, once you've flown one plane and gone from one airport to another airport, you start to get a bit bored with it all. And I realised that I needed to do a job which was going to be a challenge every day. And actually, that's what journalism turned out to be for me. An incredible education, really a non-stop education ever since I first started. So I started off in community radio in southeast London, in Woolwich, Greenwich area. And then that radio station was being run by what was at the time the Greater London Council. So it was being supported by Ken Livingstone from the 1980s. The money ran out, and they decided, we're going to privatise this, basically sell it off to a kind of commercial radio company. Now, when they moved in, first thing they did was got rid of all of the best presenters on there. You know, there was a guy called Gary RB. He was the greatest Elvis expert I ever came across. And yes, he did used to make mistakes using the turntables. And sometimes the records you'd hear the needle go across the record before it started and that sort of thing. But he was brilliant. And I realised what was going on here. They were turning this into some sort of disgusting kind of slick commercial operation, and it wasn't going to be community radio anymore. So then I phoned up the BBC in London. I said, look, I've got all this experience. I've been making programmes here for a year or so now, and I want to do some real radio. And the guy said, go away, basically. So I just kept hassling them. Eventually they said, come round for breakfast, and which is when I got the first job at the BBC. And started there in Marylebone High Street. In the top floor of that building was the Radio Times offices, and worked there for over a year literally on the news every day. So when I turn up at work, it was about 10, worked about 10 till 6 p.m., 7 p.m. shifts. You'd be getting stuck into the news of the day, and literally for the lunchtime Johnny Walker programme and for the drive time, the Tommy Vance show for the whole of London. And we had a massive listenership. Just to give you an idea, I mean, there was some guy, I remember one, coming up to Christmas, it must have been about 1990, somebody phoned in to the radio station saying, look, I've just had my car stolen with a whole load of Christmas presents in it. And I said to the producer at the time, I said, look, this guy wants to go on the radio and put out an appeal to anyone seen his car. And the producer said, okay, I'll just put him on, come on, it's Christmas. And we put him on. And you know what? Within a minute, the guy had phoned in, he'd stolen his car, and told him exactly where it was parked. So he got his Christmas presents back just in time for Christmas. It was that sort of station, which is an amazing thing in London. I mean, it's not really the same kind of sound now. It's called BBC for London now, and it's very heavily overproduced. It's kind of much more corporate now. But in those days, it really was public service, and we felt we were kind of doing a great service for London. It's also the place where the very first black broadcasters were working, doing things like doing programmes during the Brixton riots and this kind of thing. And it was an exciting place to be. So that's where I cut my teeth in journalism, doing lots of national stories, even though it was supposedly just a local station. And then I went on to work in Southampton, Salisbury, Swindon, and lots of the local stations. After that, got into environmental activism. I left BBC really over a couple of, at the time I was complaining a little bit because we'd discovered, a couple of us freelancers in Salisbury, that, which by the way is where Ted Heath was living, that there was 2 children's homes where there was sexual abuse of kids going on, and we reported this up the chain of command, so to speak, saying, look, we think we should do an investigation into this, and there was chatting to people at the Salisbury Journal too. And all of a sudden I got the sack. So, I didn't take me much to put 2 and 2 together here. And the police apparently had looked into these accusations, which looked to us pretty solid. And they said, there's nothing to see here. This is the Wiltshire Constabulary had a look, apparently. And it was connected to the guy who is the deputy leader of the Conservative group on Salisbury District, the ruling group on Salisbury District Council, actually ran these 2 children's homes. So, this is, to me, was a kind of, in a way, the prelude to what's happened with Jimmy Savile. And funnily enough, it's weird how these things work, but I worked very closely at Southampton, Radio Solent and the TV down there, with a woman called Liz McKean. Now, people may know, it was Liz at Newsnight that put together the Jimmy Savile reports and interviewed some of his, 2 of his victims, or survivors, if you want to call them that. And so Liz did this amazing piece of work at the top, really doing really should have come out, which is when the editor then said, "Oh, we're not going to run this because there's a Jimmy Savile special coming up at Christmas." So you can see I've been through this kind of difficult time through the BBC, got into environmental activism, squatting, doing land occupations, that sort of thing with this group, The Land Is Ours and George Monbiot back in the 90s. But now, and really for the last 8 years or so, I've been doing a current affairs programme in Bristol, which was very much really like the sort of stuff we were doing in London. It's just I'm producing and presenting it, and we do every week another little look at international and national news, because that's what we don't get. They do it in Germany, but we don't do it in Britain. That is to say, regional, national, if that makes sense to you. You know, so this is national and international news coming from the regions, and that's what we do on this radio show in Bristol, which is the Friday Politics show on every week, online at thisweek.org.uk.
Fantastic. I was just going to say, with the background in the radio, that's up Steve's alley, because Steve, I think, well, you know, you're the radio man when it comes to the radio stations in the 80s, and we've talked about this before. And what Tony said just sounds to what you said about the pirate radio stations in the 80s and how they probably weren't as professional as the RTEs and stuff.
Yeah.
But if you want to just, talk to Tony about that. So
yeah, well, they
similar
weren't
experiences.
Yeah, I suppose they weren't professional, but they done it for the love of it, obviously, and that's what kind of gave them the audience. And actually, when you mentioned a name there, Tony, Johnny Walker, that brought me right back to, I think, Johnny Walker on Caroline. I think he's dead now. May he rest in peace. But yeah, I know, like, people done it for the love of it, and then obviously Big Brother seeing that, it could be manipulated and obviously commercialised, and that's, I think, that in my opinion is when it all went downhill.
Yes, certainly at the BBC. I mean, basically the way it all happened was 1987. We had a Conservative government. We had a very, very tough. I mean, it's basically year after year. It was somebody's turn, whether it's the miners, the travellers, to get the Tory boot in the teeth. In 1987, it was the BBC's turn, and they've been doing some very good programmes, really. One, for example, called Maggie's Militant Tendency, which is all about the far right in the Tory party, looking at people like Jonathan Aitken, and making you realise that these mainstream Tory MPs, ministers even, were very, very close. In fact, some of them were going along to these fascist meetings. So it was a very powerful panorama. And I obviously can't imagine something like that happening today, because what happened was Victor Rothschild had a word in the ear of Margaret Thatcher and spoke to the chairman of the BBC at the time, it was Marmaduke Hussey, and said, "Can you sack the Director General?" And Hussey said, "I'm not really sure," and eventually realised that he, by various means he could sack the Director General. And so Alistair Milne, who's the father of the present press advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, was promptly booted out of the BBC for backing all these independent programmes. Now, he hadn't been biased, he'd been doing anti-Labour militant, they've been doing both sides, which is what the BBC should do. And look, this is a key thing that people seem to have forgotten, is that as journalists, people like me need to have a basic kind of tenured right to keep their jobs. Now, this is quite normal at a university. If you know that the government can't boot you out because you've got a security of tenure there, basically. And so our universities and our media, since the end of this, has really gone really terribly downhill because everybody that's in their jobs has become self-censoring, really, because they're scared of upsetting the government, and particularly at the BBC, obviously being government funded, Royal Charter, all that sort of thing.
Tony, do you think that there's laziness as well and plagiarism came in? They're just seeing stories on the internet and just plagiarising it and then putting it out there rather than actually doing the research as well?
Well, look, I think it's really that all of the best journalists just get booted out. That's what happens, and you end up with people who are very mediocre or right wing, like people like Andrew Marr, who were basically right behind Tony Blair in the war in Iraq. People like that are promoted. So you get a kind of self-censorship. You get an atmosphere created whereby everybody knows what they're supposed to think, what they're supposed to say. I mean, George Orwell called it groupthink, didn't he? Everybody's supposed to know. And it's the same exact thing going on in the world of finance at universities and in finance journalism. There's this kind of orthodoxy accepted that, this quantitative easing is the only real way out, blah, blah. And actually, of course, there's lots of other things which are simply not looked at, not just out of laziness, but because people are constantly aware that they may lose their jobs, they may stop getting good assignments, they may not be being fed the right, good stories anymore. And, at the end of the day, most journalists, of course, have got mortgages, they've got kids to look after, they've got wives to look after, and that's the way they get you. Luckily for me, I just didn't have family at the time. And so I just decided, look, I'm going to, my word on the radio or the TV or whatever is worth exactly what, because I'm going to say exactly what I think. And that seems to me to be what's now lacking, is there's a lack of courage. Yeah. I mean, one person that did that, if you go back, you can see bit by bit, various aspects of the BBC have been cut out over the last 20 years or so. One of the last really good programmes was a documentary made by Jonathan Meades, called Jerry Building, which is all about Nazi architecture. And he really lays into things like, for example, he has a go at Prince Charles in that. He says, well, look, this Leon Krier is Prince Charles's favourite architect, and he's the big, he calls him the Speer carrier for Albert Speer, who was the armaments minister under Hitler and also the chief architect of most of the Nazi architecture, including things like the Nuremberg rally site, So, he's not afraid to put the boot into Prince Charles, and neither should any other journalist be.
Yeah, I think so. As you say, we have the same over here, Tony, where the media. Well, the problem is that we have a chap over here, a billionaire called Dennis O'Brien, and he's snapped up the majority of the media over here in Ireland, which means obviously he controls the whole lot. And of course, you're going to get your propaganda as usual. So the BBC. I lived in London for 17 years. So I'm familiar with some of the radio programs and obviously TV programs during the 90s as well. And it's just the control of the media. I mean, what we're seeing over here, it's just majorly controlled. Now, I know you wanted to talk about, and I think it's important that we do talk about the BBC and when that was kind of sinisterly taken over in the early 90s.
Well, yeah, it was. Also, I ought to say, Johnny Walker's still very much alive and kicking. I think, in fact, he's still on BBC Radio 2 on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon or something. Worth mentioning that. I wasn't sure. I've just checked it up. And, he is. But look, with the self-censorship, what it's doing is it's slowly but surely cutting off all of the possibilities that we have of making sense of the world around us. It's herding us around. And that's what we try and do with the programme in Bristol every week, is to make sure that listeners have got a much wider spread of opinion. The idea is, with the BBC, is to narrow down the spectrum of different types of views that people are exposed to. And so, for example, when I say things like, well, actually the Treasury could start printing money tomorrow if it wanted to, nobody else is saying that, nobody at all.
Yeah.
When you're talking about things like, actually the British Army aren't really interested in going abroad. They're quite happy to train to defend Britain, but they don't want to go abroad. I mean, there's a lot of soldiers that think exactly like that. And, you don't hear that kind of view expressed. So that's what we try and do, is break these various taboos. The other thing is, I mean, we always look in, one of the things I always look into is power. Where are the decisions really being made? Because so much of what we see, over there in Ireland and in Britain and almost all over the Western world, and in Russia too, of course, and China, is the decisions are being made far away from Parliament and far away from the people that we elect. The decisions are really made by these kind of big interest groups, lobby groups of the banksters and big business. That's where the real decisions are being made. So the idea is, I suppose, to try and pull away the veil a little bit, like, the Wizard of Oz. Who's actually behind there and who's making these decisions? Because power rests largely with people that you would never even recognise if you passed them in the street.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of, if you want to call it, the secret society and the secret handshake club, where the people at the top, and when we all know that they're all controlled puppets anyway, and they're pulled by the strings. I mean, that's why we talked about the Trump and Hillary selection as opposed to the election.
Okay, let me just stop you there, because I don't think they totally controlled a lot of these people. I mean, for example, Robin Cook was a very independent-minded guy. I mean, he was the foreign secretary under Blair, and he resigned. And then he had an accident, didn't he? He fell off a mountain or something. He had a heart attack.
Apparently.
Yeah, so I think that there are people who are in these positions of power who do have their own minds and have got very much sort of, thoughts of their own. For example, Jeremy Corbyn, I think, is one of those. I don't think he's a puppet, but those are the people you will find, miraculously or whatever the opposite of a miracle is, suddenly find themselves either sick or ill. Actually, was watching Jeremy Corbyn on the telly a couple of nights ago, and he looked absolutely sick as a dog. I don't know what's happened to him. I don't think it's just a lack of sleep, but he really does look ill.
Well, he's a member of the Fabian Society, as is Tony Blair and a few other people. So I think, investigation, and you have to kind of look into what's, what these societies are all involved in, and why are people
Well, look, I totally agree with you that a lot of these societies, like the Fabians, the Bilderbergers, etc., are very influential.
Yeah.
But sometimes, I've seen, for example, people go along to these Bilderberg conferences who actually then start kicking back against it all. They're not necessarily part of, a kind of organised plan. And in fact, sometimes they get into these circles, these power circles, and then they start saying, well, hang on a minute, this is not the way one really good example is the former editor of the Observer magazine, or the newspaper, Will Hutton. He went along to these Bilderberg meetings. This is back in the late 1990s, and then he started kicking off against them in his newspaper, and he's calling them the high priests of globalization, which is really taking the mickey out of them. So, this whole attitude that anyone that's anything to do with any of these societies is part of the conspiracy, I think is actually wrong. Some people are part of it, and then they just get annoyed with it. They get, okay, usually, as soon as they start kicking off against it or make any kind of public comment against it, their public profile will start to plummet. But some of them are brave enough to actually speak out.
So do you think, obviously the Robin Cook issue is an ideal example where he did speak out, and you are right, some of them do stand up and say, I'm not happy about this, and he resigned, and then, all of a sudden he had an accident on a ski slope, or wherever, on a mountain, or wherever the accident was.
What actually happened with Robin Cook, which is horrific really, is that he had a heart attack apparently of some kind, up on a Ben Stack in Scotland. And just so happened to be a helicopter on an exercise passing nearby. So when I think it was his wife Gaynor that phoned the ambulance, or phoned 999 or whatever on the mobile phone, this helicopter just happened to be in the vicinity and came to take him off to hospital. But the most shocking thing about it all was the helicopter crew refused to let Gaynor get into the helicopter. So yes, she helped get his body. Well, it wasn't. He was very much alive at the time. Into the helicopter. At which point there was some kind of altercation, and they said, no, you can't come too. You can't get in. She's saying, well, what are you talking about? It's my husband. You can't take him. At which point they, put on the accelerator and off they went. And by the time he got to hospital, he was dead. So, this is the sort of another thing which may interest you to do with the death of Robin Cook. Is that he was very, very popular man in Scotland, and particularly in that area. People knew that he loved that part of Scotland. And they set up a memorial at roughly the spot where the helicopter landed, etc., to Robin. Now, you know what happened? About a year after the memorial, was a giant cairn was put there in memory to Robin Cook. The cairn was demolished by the local council, if you can believe that.
Well, I can, because that's what happens. It's amazing when you see people in politics, especially in the UK as well as Ireland. What's happening over here in Ireland is probably the same in the UK. We have masses of homelessness, and evictions going on, foreclosures, and it's just reaching a scale that is unbelievable, and the politicians are there, and they're talking about the GDP going up, and there's great growth, and things are going brilliant, and there's more jobs being created, and it's such a bag of BS. It's unbelievable. And so they believe their own PR. Basically, or maybe the yes men around them are all telling them that, everybody's saying you're brilliant, you should stay in government. This is what we said earlier on the show. I know you probably wouldn't have heard it, Tony, at the start of the show, but on a local radio station over here in Ireland called News Talk, they talked about the latest opinion polls show Fine Gael, which is one of the government parties over here in Ireland, regaining position as most popular party in Ireland. They are hated with a vengeance. So, the majority of the people, they know what politics is about. And any time they see the politicians, the names used are quite colourful. Parasite being one of them, which is which is quite convenient because that tends to be what they are. And we know the game. I don't know much about the UK politics, but over here in Ireland, we have what's called a party whip system, and the senior politicians control everything. It's a democratic dictatorship. And democracy is mob rule. When I hear people saying, "Oh, we have democracy," that means to me, that's saying to me, you don't understand what democracy is, because it's mob rule. And
part of the operation to control the population. I mean, this is really what this is about. I mean, it is about mass control of mass populations. If you go back, you can have a look at a very good series that was on in, I think it was about 2002 or something, by Adam Curtis, called The Century of the Self, which is all about public relations. And that seems to have totally invaded the whole political sphere. So, you're talking about mass mind control, really, and that being done through the press. And as I was saying earlier on, controlling the debate, controlling the narrative, controlling the national narrative. And that's where I think we've just let our populations down, is by allowing the mass media to just be co-opted by a ruling elite. Whatever you want to call these people, I would call them a criminal elite, because it's quite clear the massive crimes that went on, particularly in 2008 over the bank bailouts. What you've seen there is, first of all, for several years, these big banks, mostly banks like Lloyd's, RBS, and NatWest, etc., and Northern Rock as well, having false accounting for several years, with whole massive amounts of so-called assets on their books which were worth nothing at all. Now, not only of those firms that signed off those accounts, the auditors got off scot-free, but they've also got together in a little criminal gang in order to make sure that this can continue to happen in the future. So we're talking about PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, Deloitte's the main culprits of this. And so they are basically in collusion, the auditors, with all the big banksters to fleece the public. Now, my colleague Martin Summers, I did a radio show with every Friday, he calls them the suicide bombers, right? Because the banks sit in the room with the politicians and they say, unless you do this, we're going to close all the cash points at midnight. Yeah?
Yeah.
So effectively, they're financial terrorists. Max Kaiser talks about this term as well.
Yeah.
And these people are criminals. They have stolen literally tens or hundreds of billions of pounds from the public. Those banks should have gone bust by law, and they didn't. And so what they've done is they've used all that public money that they stole in 2008 with the collusion of Gordon Brown and others, by the way. They've used that to lobby for more and more power. So we've got really the only thing stopping the public understanding what's really going on is by controlling the press. And I think that is the key to all of this, is these people have realised, look, if us criminals can control the press, and we can control the media, the broadcasting outlets, which, by the way, have been less and less and less, over the years.
Yeah.
There used to be a very diverse ownership of the press. Now it's only in a handful of hands.
Yeah. If
we can control that, we can control the outcome of this. So that's what the criminal elite's big prize is, to be able to control the press like they do in places like South America, just to make sure they can cover their own crimes. And the press has become, it's also, of course, involved in war. Big style, like with Syria, Libya, etc., demonizing the next, so-called dictator or the next person whose oil we want to steal. They'll demonize them for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then that's cover for the army to go in. So we're now seeing, I think, that the criminal elite using the media they can pretty much guarantee that they can spin out their lies every time. And now we've seen, just in the last week or so, this whole thing about fake news. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a fantastic article on The Intercept about this, and
we did mention it at the start of the show.
I know, it's hilarious, isn't it? The people that sold us the rubbish about weapons of mass destruction are now preaching about fake news out there on the internet.
I know. We mentioned that at the start of the show, and basically what's happening, I'm sure you've seen it, Tony D, on YouTube. Today I seen the same article on 3 different channels, and it's like all the clickbait. So not only are we getting the fake news, so what I said earlier was, on the show, at the start of the show, was that what I think they're going to do, and this is just my opinion, is they're going to fill the internet with more and more fake news, and then blame it on the alternative media. media and say that the alternative media need to be shut down because of all this fake news, when they're the ones that are actually doing the fake news in the first place?
Well, of course they are. It's crazy, isn't it? And I mean, what they're trying to do, I was on the show on Friday, we were discussing this, a really good discussion about it. And what I would suggest is going on here is you've got, I see the ruling elite, the criminal elite, as a kind of Sauron's tower, from the Lord of the Rings, this kind of eye looking down, kind of, a kind of searchlight kind of sweeping around for the next person to destroy or whatever, anybody that dares to speak against them. And what we've seen the Russians do very effectively, both in Ukraine and Crimea and down in Syria, is actually block the military ambitions of these people. And they've done that pretty effectively. We're just about to see, it looks like, the liberation of Aleppo finally back to the proper government of Syria after all these terrorists we funded have been ruling the roost there for a while. And so the eye of Sauron then turns into domestic politics and onto the domestic scene. And that's what they can't bear, is that there are people like you and I that are out there informing the public and that they can't control us. Also, of course, they're very annoyed with other groups like Russia Today. They seem to have a particular problem with Russia Today.
Big time.
They keep calling it some sort of Putin's mouthpiece. Well, tell me if Theresa May's mouthpiece isn't the BBC, because I see almost all the main political presenters being very, very much pro-Tory party on the BBC night after night. So, that I think is the only way to see I'm sure there are other ways, but is that they're getting scared. They're getting rattled by the fact that social media has allowed the public, the population, to be put straight in touch with people like you and I at the blink of an eye. There are people like Patrick Henningsen, for example, as well, doing 21st Century Wire in the States, doing an absolutely brilliant professional job on making sure that almost any major international incident you've got a real expert, there at a click of a button. And, this is what's rattling them, is they've lost control of it.
This is what we said. Funny enough, we said this earlier on the show as well about the mainstream media. And we said, one of the things we said earlier on the show is people need to start looking at getting internet radios. If they get internet radios, one of the radios that we looked at is a Hammer IR110. And that is, we don't promote Wi-Fi, by the way, and we have reasons why we don't promote Wi-Fi, but you can hardwire this internet radio and you can program in your own radio stream. So get rid of your normal radios, knock off your TVs and get internet radios, and then tune in to the stations that you want to listen to, the alternative radio stations that you want to listen to, and get the real news. And this is what we said earlier in the show. So great minds think alike. Steve has a question for you there. Steve.
Yeah, just wondering, Tony, with all the information that's floating around in relation to Brexit and what's happening there, I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that? And do you believe come next March that Theresa May will actually trigger Article 50? Because I know there are people trying to block that left, right and centre. And as recently as Friday, I think people were saying that I don't know if it has to go somewhere. They want, I think it's the House of Lords, to get involved to basically say whether they can actually go ahead and do this, or if it needs they need to kind of look further into it. And they're also saying as well, again I heard this on Friday, that they're going to start putting lots of information out there now to let people know, the public know, that this is exactly what's going to happen if we trigger Article 50, and try and scaremonger people into possibly having a second election.
Well, look, summer 2015, the Greeks voted to leave the euro, didn't they? But they're still there.
Well, we voted to leave the Lisbon Treaty. We voted no, and they said, no, you got it wrong. We're going to ask you again.
Well, of course, look, there is an agenda out there, right? The United States of Europe, it's called. The US started the ball rolling at the end of the Second World War, funded the European movement, and that the whole thing of European Monetary Union was always a major part of that. Funded by the CIA, funded by Nazis like Alan Dulles, people like that were behind this. And there's a lot of people also that will point to this document, which you can find online, which is from 1942, written in Berlin, called the Europäische Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft, which was their recipe for basically cartels, German cartels, mainly to be running Europe. So all of the areas of major industry would be divided up between basically a bunch of gangs territorially, and that there would be no competition. They would be able to charge what they wanted, and that's the sort of world we're starting to see now. So I think with Brexit, let's look at what the European Union was really all about, which we joined in 1973, but we didn't join a political union, and it slowly transmogrified into one, didn't it? So I'm quite proud of the Brits for voting for Brexit. Very glad to see it. It's almost like we have yet again started the ball rolling against the kind of fascist system, and it looks also as if, say, for example, the French, the Italians, even the Germans were given an opportunity to vote out of the EU, they'd almost certainly do so. Now, back to your main point about what's going to happen next March. Well, I honestly think that's anyone's guess. And these kinds of things are contested, yeah? So I think that there is definitely a massive pushback to persuade Theresa May, to persuade the Cabinet that actually this isn't a very good idea, blah, blah, blah. We've seen leaks today, I don't know if you've seen this story, that Mark Carney is plotting at the Bank of England to make sure that Britain stays in the European Union until 2021. That's a document that some bright spark leaked to the Independent just today, I think. So, there's all sorts of forces ranged against Theresa May. It's also worth remembering that she was a Remainer, so it's very strange that the Conservative Party, without any kind of vote of its members, should replace one Remainer with another Remainer as Prime Minister. So there was no real change at the top. And there's also a lot of doubt over to whether Boris Johnson was really a Brexiteer or a Remainer. And we've had this whole phenomenon of the Remoaners, haven't we? The people that are just griping on and on and on about, oh no, they made the wrong decision, a bit like you guys in Lisbon. So I honestly don't know. One thing I can tell you for sure is that the international financial elite, the criminal elite I was talking about before, are going to kick Britain in the short and curlies when it comes to putting in that Article 50 letter. The idea being to show Britain out as an example to the whole of the rest of Europe before they get into the major elections of next year, is to say, well, look, guys, don't you dare vote out of the EU because you're going to suffer like Britain suffers. So I think this is what's going on, is that there's a lot of preparation being made to make sure Britain's economy screams next Easter, or whenever it is this letter goes in. And that will be there to show an example to the rest of Europe. Look, this is what you do if you cross us and if you start to kick back against this United States of Europe, because we intend to carry on with it.
Yeah, I've heard that information too, Tony, that was the plan, that the UK will be made an example of Europe, to say this is what's going to happen if anybody else attempts to do this. To move out of Europe. Now,
but just quickly, there's a couple of people who've been saying this, which I thought is worth mentioning. People who are very close to the criminal elite. One of them is Vince Cable, and I say that because of my work on the Bilderberg conferences, is that Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, he was the chief economist at Shell, and he's very, very close to the people that really run things. The Shell, for example, was a company that during the war had basically split itself into two, and so they were half on the side of the Nazis and half on the side of the Allies, knowing that whoever won the war, they were going to make a fortune. That's the sort of person these are the kinds of people that were on both sides. I mean, even for example, the British royal family were very much divided. There was a lot of pro-fascist people within the royal family. There were even within the army. For example, there was this M section of MI6 during the Second World War, which was being run by Major Desmond Morton. Ian Fleming was working for them, and various other people very close to Winston Churchill, who seemed to be running their own little private army funded by the King. And so there is all sorts of questions about who is really running things here. And sometimes there are factions that they don't really care which way a war finishes. They're going to make money anyhow.
Well, it's all about money. I mean, we've heard about Prescott Bush funding the Germans. Then we've heard about Hilfiger doing the uniforms for the German army, and IBM supplying the computers for the German army as well. It's business. I mean, that's what it is.
But the thing is, it's also, I would say it's actually not just about money. It's about power and control.
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that money is a means to power, money is as a means to control. If you look at the history of the Second World War, this more recent attack on Islam since 9/11 attacks, since around about that time, once there was the fall of the Soviet Union, Islam has now replaced the Soviets and communism as the big bugbear. We've got to have an enemy, obviously, in order to justify all this massive defence spending. Is you've actually really got an attack on monotheistic faiths. I mean, to begin with, you had this attack on the Jews, completely insane by Hitler. Although, of course, there are many Jewish people are in powerful positions and abuse those positions just like anyone else does. There was a real attempt to try and make every Jew appear to have been a problem in Nazi Germany, and they did. They spent a lot of time demonizing ordinary Jews, really, the rabbinic tradition, and they started to smash it to pieces, to stamp it out under the Nazi control in Europe, basically using these, as you said, IBM Hollerith machines. There's that brilliant book by Edwin Black, which looks very closely at the way that actually it was actually IBM that designed large parts of the extermination of the Jews program. Basically, the Nazis said to IBM, look, we're not quite sure how to do this. And IBM come forward and say, well, hey, we're the solutions people. We can help you. They designed the means by which Jews were first identified and then...
Which was the punch card system.
That's right.
Yeah.
They were first identified who they were, then they took their assets off them, then they put them into ghettos, and then they began the program of either expelling them from the country or putting them in concentration camps and exterminating them. So this is very much an IBM system that was designed here, working very closely with the Nazis. And look, if you go back to the 1930s, which is where we're talking about here, when these deals were done, you're also looking at a very similar situation economically, and that's what's so chilling about this. After the 1929 crash, you then had Teddy Roosevelt and the New Deal in the United States, which was a brilliant plan to start to, get government spending going. The New Deal. They started spending loads and loads of money, borrowing loads of money to spend it to get the economy going again, and that was starting to work. So that's why in 1933. There was this attempted coup in the US with Prescott Bush and various other of these basically pro-Nazi industrialists in America who tried to get rid of Roosevelt because he was making such a good deal with this New Deal. So, I guess it's a similar kind of tension that's going on at the top right now.
It's funny that you just mentioned earlier Alan Dulles. I'm in the middle of reading Ben Rich's book, got to do with the Skunk Works. And Alan Dulles is there in the 1950s, involved in the Skunk Works and the secret projects, the YouTube product, and the Blackbird and the SR-71. And it just so happens you mentioned there. Do you have questions for Tony there, Steve?
Yeah, we have a question from Joan. Joan is just wondering, Tony, what do you think of what do you say about the army of the EU?
Well, it's happening, isn't it? I mean, this is one of the things they held back to make sure that the people in Britain wouldn't be thinking or talking about this in the run-up to the Brexit vote. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. What we've got a consolidation of power into Brussels. Okay, you remember that's NATO headquarters there too, so military power is bound to be part of it all. I actually when I was at the Bilderberg conference this year, and I hope you're familiar with the Bilderbergers, are you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I went to Dresden in June, and it was a fascinating time. Slightly scary to see the Pegida, the German right-wing group over there, which is completely normal. Most of the people are very much pro-white, German nationalism, anti any kind of immigration. They had a very kind of normal, like literally thousands of people every Monday evening were turning out on the streets of Dresden. But the main point here being that this is where, the Bilderberger was clearly where, the real movers and shakers in Europe and the United States are getting together. Also, look, worth mentioning, hang on a minute, because how does this stuff all really work? All you need to do is to look at Italy and the P2 lodge in Italy, and you can see you've got all of the real kind of elite institutions, power brokers, you're talking about police, secret services, basically running the country on a secret committee meeting every week, and this, I think, newspapers, secret services, bankers, all buddies with each other, including people from opposite political parties. But anyway, sorry, I've kind of gone off on a bit of a thread. What was your question again from your listener?
She talked about the EU army. We have about we have about 10 minutes, so we do want to look on the positive side, but we want to answer that regarding the EU army. Shoot away.
Yeah, well, so it's a consolidation of power, isn't it? I mean, it's one organisation effectively, and it was simply the fact that at the beginning of the Second World War, the Americans decided they wanted one embassy to talk to. They didn't want to talk to 30 different embassies, and that's one of the reasons I feel that the Bilderberg is the place to be. In fact, the other thing is, when I was there, I met some really interesting people. This is why I brought it up. There was a guy called Volker Reusing, and he was from North Germany, I think Wuppertal somewhere, just a kind of ordinary lawyer, very, very kind of plain-speaking guy. But he explained to me, he said, look, and you can find this on YouTube if you look for it. Maybe you can put a link up at the end of the show. Is Bilderberg exposed in Dresden? I did a series of 5 or 6 interviews when I was over there. Bilderberg exposed in Dresden. And what he explained is that you've got this various laws have been passed through the European Parliament into law now by the Commission. And this particular one is called nation-state bankruptcy, right? So it means that what happens when your country goes bankrupt, say Ireland goes bankrupt, what happens? And they've now actually passed laws in the EU to say, effectively, the police and the civil service and the army all become the property of the banks. So you're Irish, I mean, still in Britain, this is law until we leave the EU. So the nation-state bankruptcy procedures are absolutely hideous. The other thing is that they have also passed European laws that allow the suing of any newspaper by anyone that believes that they've had any kind of damage from that newspaper. So if an article has hurt someone's career, even if it's true, they can still sue you. In fact, they can take down media institutions. So have a look for that. The guy's name is Volker Reusing, and he's a lawyer in Germany, and he was explaining, look, guys, these people are out to get us. And this is a kind of fascist system which has been set up in the EU. The idea being that everyone has to kind of go down this road, otherwise they get booted by the banks, as Greece has already been done, and Britain is about to do. Because what we're dealing with really, I think, is the use of banks instead of tanks. In the Second World War, tanks would roll in, take over your village, your town, kill people. Well, banks are doing the same. They're killing people. They're taking away basic benefits, people's food, people's livelihoods. I mean, you were talking about evictions. That's happening more and more now with the bank's rule. And so I think we have to be extremely wary about Brussels. And I don't think it's actually going to happen, the United States of Europe. I really honestly don't believe that they can do it now. But I think there's a lot of people going to be hurt in the process of getting back our sovereignty.
I think there are a lot of positives happening, and there are a lot of changes going on, although be it slow. And I think you're right. I don't think it will happen. There are good things happening in the background. When we've had, we got the statistics saying that we average about 2 suicides a day. Now in Ireland, of a population of 4.5 million people, that's an awful lot of people, and this is again ignored by the government. But we have about 10 minutes, Tony. So what's your positive take on things?
Okay, I know I've been being a bit grim, but I think you do have to, in a way, you've got to kind of go down into the pit to see how bad things are before you pop up with some solutions.
Yeah.
And the solutions I see it is is an amazing thing about humanity. And I learned this for the first time when I visited South America decades ago, is that when people are oppressed, my God, they come together. And they really do start, there's less of this Facebook nonsense, and people are just their communities actually come together to help. When services are taken away, everyone is then moaning about the government. People are that much more aware, I think, that what's happening in the mainstream media bears no real relevance to their lives, to our lives, etc. And you'll get a much better analysis and conversation quite often down the pub than you will on the telly. So people just don't watch it. Young people, look, that's for me the most positive sign.
Yeah, I think
a lot of young people. Okay, so young people are always into trivia and that kind of stuff. Hair or whatever things, clothes. But I think when it comes to politics, you meet increasingly, I do anyway, youngsters who have got an incredibly switched on point of view, that they know that there is this kind of new world order. If you talk to them about the Illuminati, they'll know exactly who they are historically, They will also be aware of the whole sort of Freemasonry cult and their influence in history. So even though these things are taboo on the mainstream media, they're talked about all the time amongst teenagers, people in their early 20s. The younger generation, I think, is coming up with incredible, much more knowledge than we had when we were growing up at that age about how the world really works. And so the solutions are going to come from them, I think, the youngsters.
Mind you, we didn't have the internet, Tony, did we? So, you know, I mean, the internet has to, you know...
But look, to be fair, the mainstream press was a lot better. I mean, we had things like balanced documentaries coming out until, you know, early mid-1990s. We had a mainstream press that would you know, dish the dirt when things went wrong. And thank God the internet appeared just about at the right time there, didn't it? You know, so we've got a tremendous amount. And the thing is, the truth is out there, like they say on the X-Files. You know, if there's anything you really want to have a look at and you want to get to the bottom of it, you could. I mean, we did, for example, with the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, this guy who was murdered with polonium, this radioactive stuff. Famous picture of him dying on a bed.
That's right. The Russian guy, yeah.
No, there's lots of talk on the mainstream press. Oh, we don't know what happened. Blah 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 blah. Yes, we do. Sorry, guys, we do know what happened. And if you take the trouble, you can go out there and find it. One of the places that I do this is on our 9/11. It's actually called The Quest for Truth, The War on Freedom and the Quest for Truth. 911forum.org.uk. And that's another thing I'm involved in as a moderator on that. I'm on there quite a lot, you know, just sort of wading in and saying, how about this article? We pretty much put together a trail which pins the murder of Litvinenko on this Russian oligarch, Boris Berezovsky. I mean, he was involved. It's a fascinating story. And it's a can of worms. I called it on the radio on Friday, I called it a silo of snakes because it's so big. Because it goes right back to how Putin came to power. And the false flag bomb attacks in 1999 in Moscow and around there, which were used in order to re-kick off again the Chechen war. These attacks bombs were planted by the Russian Secret Service, the FSB, but they were blamed on the Chechens. And because he was a chief in the FSB at the time, Putin covered these up. Now, he covered these up, and although they were perpetrated by the Western intelligence services and by Boris Berezovsky, this oligarch. And then what happened was Putin was trusted by Berezovsky as his little puppet president. And then what happened? Well, Putin turned the tables on Berezovsky and gave him 24 hours to leave the country a few years later. And so that's how Putin came to power. And I think it's fascinating that you can actually go back and have a look at some of the original documentaries. For example, there's one on NTV called The Assassination of Russia, which is basically a documentary made by the first ever independent Russian TV channel, all about the Litvinenko book, which is blowing up Russia. The book is called. That was published, I think, about 2008. But the documentary is one of the most incredible things you'll ever see. It's got the Secret Service people who are in charge, the local police, plus the residents of this big apartment block just outside Moscow, where they found a massive bomb that was going to blow this apartment block to pieces. And they all were in the same studio together, and there are various people accusing each other and saying, well, no, that's not what happened, is it? And that's the kind of telly I'd like to see. And if I was a Director General of the BBC, you'd have that sort of thing every night.
Definitely have both sides to it. We have another question, one more question for you. Steve.
Yeah, John is wondering, Tony, do you have any problem or have you had any problems from any groups after attending a Bilderberg meeting, knowing that you're going to be discussing topics that were discussed there?
Well, I mean, I get a lot of, sort of, I suppose, hate mail of various sorts. I've had about 4 or 5 death threats now. You know, yes, I mean, of course you're going to get some flack for saying this stuff. But the thing is, at the end of the day, for me, I think you've just got to do journalism. For me, I don't care where the story ends. You've got to follow the story to wherever it ends, even if it is to the rich and powerful, which it normally is, actually. Any of these big stories I've followed, including things like the collaboration between the Allies and the Nazis at the end of the Second World War, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was basically a Nazi agent in London at the end of World War II, you'll find that, you know, many of these stories do go right back to the ruling elite, the Tory party, the royal family, and if you're not going to follow the story to the end, you may as well not start it in the first place. I mean, obviously, you know, the Princess Diana assassination being one obvious example of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's incredible how interlaced people are when they're in the actual in the secret societies and the elite, and it's the control. And we've always said on the show, it's a bit like mafia gangs where they don't like each other, but they need each other to keep the system going. Because if the system, if any one part falls down, then the rest is going to crumble. But
it is a mafia. Yeah, it's the same. They even have the same sort of oaths, don't they? The omerta type of oaths in the Freemasons. Worth also mentioning in China. You've got the Yakuza societies, you've got the triads. They also have, funnily enough, they've got the same secret signs as the Freemasons have. And if you look at the Freemason oaths, you'll see they go back to witchcraft. You'll see exact parallels with some of the wording of witchcraft. The idea being that, basically you're surrendering your life to the master of the lodge, the coven or whatever. And you're saying, well, if I step out of line, you can kill me. Well, anyone that says that really has got it coming to them, and they're basically traitors to the rest of us. And this is why I draw the parallel with the Lord of the Rings. You've got a similar kind of thing going on there with Saruman, the wizard who throws his lot in with the bad guys. I don't think that we should allow these secret societies. I think they should be banned, and certainly these people should not be allowed to take public office because their loyalty is to their religious cult and not to us.
Totally agree. Listen, we're definitely going to have to do a part 2 because that subject alone is going to fill up a full show, because we've had an ex-Mason on here, and we've experiences of that. But listen, Tony, it's been brilliant having you on. Thanks a lot for coming on. We'll definitely do a part 2 in the new year. And we'll do a full show next time. I'm going to pass you over to Steve. Steve's going to get all your contact details, where people can find you and where they can track you down. And I mean that in a nice way.
The easiest place to find the show and download it. I mean, you can stick it on your phone, put it in your car and have a listen when there's something boring on the radio. Don't kick the radio. Put one of our MP3s on. You'll find this all at thisweek.org.uk. Nice and easy to remember. Thisweek.org.uk.
Okay, thisweek.org.uk. Yeah, some people asking for the
And also, if people have got stories for me, they want to email, that's no problem. All the links are there.
Just a very quick question, Tony. It does say that you were involved with Bristol Community Radio. I'm just wondering, is that still going? Do you do live streams and podcasts?
Well, you certainly do, yeah. Just like Johnny Walker is still going. Yeah, Bristol Community. Yeah. It's Bristol Community FM, and we do a live show from 5 p.m. till 7 p.m. every Friday. The first hour is really with a local politician or an MP, looking into the stuff from that week's news nationally mostly and some locally. And then we really go for it in the second hour, looking into all sorts of, more esoteric stuff, and also trying to get to the bottom of some of these massive taboos. We've just started a new series of particularly looking at, for example, this week we did the money system, a whole load of sort of expose really. We had the Chancellor's autumn statement saying, well, look, this is what he's not saying, and nobody is saying it either. We had a whole thing on surveillance with the passing of the Snoopers Charter, which is where we got into looking at all this stuff by Edwin Black, the IBM and the Holocaust and that sort of thing. So, we really do every week try and push the boat out to allow the listeners to keep ahead of the curve a bit.
Okay, brilliant. Well, that's great, Tony. Okay, Tony, stay with us there for a minute. We're just going to go off to a musical break, but thanks again for coming on. Just stay with us there for a minute.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Cheers.
This is Open Your Mind Radio on OYMradio.com, UnitedWeStrike.com and PeoplesInternetRadio.com.
Okay, we're back. Eye in the Sky. I just want to say that these are Alan's 45s that we're playing here on the old turntable. Nothing to do with my CD collection.
And I have to say, well done. You can't hear the scratch.
No, I don't know. Well, that's because you never played them.
No.
Great information there from Tony. I know some people were saying that get him on for a part 2. He has agreed to come on in a couple of months' time. So yes, we'll have more from Tony.
We'll do a full show with Tony. Now, what was I going to say? Yeah, apologies to Hilfiger. Thanks, Chris, for just reminding me there. It's actually Hugo Boss who did the German army uniforms. I knew it was one of them. I thought it was Hilfiger.
He was an aftershave guy. No?
Yeah, I think he does aftershave as well. But yeah, they did the black uniforms for the Nazis.
Oh, very stylish.
So I do think Hilfiger's in there somewhere though. Something in the back of my head says they were involved in something. Anyway, so there you go. So any other business before we close everything down. Yes, we're still trying to get this lady Anya, who left a message on the answer machine. Anya, if you're out there, give us a call. You left a message on the answer machine, but you didn't leave your phone number, and we don't have any contact details for you. So if you can give us a shout, Anya, we will be happy to speak to you about your idea about doing a painting or sculpture to raise funds for the homeless. And if you want to just remind people about the Open Your Mind conference there, Steve.
Yes, I'd be delighted. Thanks for giving me the page. Yeah, the Open Mind Conference that we spoke of last week. It's in Dooley's Hotel in Waterford City. That's the place to be on February the 25th and 26th in 2017. It's brought to you by the Awake and Aware in South East Ireland group. And as we did mention, tickets for this unique event are selling out rapidly, but you can get an early board weekend pass for the whole event for only €49, which is a bargain for these type of events. The limited early board tickets offer is until the 31st of December. And hint, hint, they would make a great Christmas present for somebody.
Exactly.
There you go.
I'm sure they did. They do aftershave as well.
Aftershave?
Aftershave, yeah. Aftershave. Right. Okay. So next week, guess what? We're still trying to sort out the guests for next week because we're waiting on contact information. We're waiting on them to confirm. If not, we'll have somebody in. You know yourself. We know what we do. We do our best. Just keep your eye on the schedule, and we'll see what we can do for next week. See what we can, what guest reading we can pencil in. Now, just a reminder on the internet radios. I will recommend people go onto YouTube and have a look at the internet radios. Check out the Hammer, which is HAMAIR 110. If you want to avoid, using Wi-Fi in your house, you need to get a hardwired version of the internet radio. Now, there are different prices. Some are cheap, some are there. But what you want to make sure is before you buy it, or whoever you buy it off, that you can program in your own radio stream. Because if they sell it to you and they say, oh, you can only play what's on the radio, that's a bit pointless. So, and this is why I rang the company Hammer in Germany, and they said, yes, you can put in your own stream. But I've also gone to the actual database, or the company who run the database, for their list of radio shows, and I've asked, how do you get your radio show on the list? They haven't got back to me yet, so I don't know what's going on there. But we'll look into it anyway. But it's on our wish list anyway. Maybe Santi might be nice. But
maybe Santi might be nice twice.
Twice, yeah, exactly. Yeah, twice. I forgot there is two of us here. But that's the news. We have to redo the video for the fan. But we haven't got around to doing that this weekend. We might be able to do it next weekend. We'll see what happens. There's a couple of things that are in the pipeline. But we've no guests next week. Then we have Thomas on the Sunday after that, and then the Sunday after that we have just myself and Steve doing the yearly annual review as we normally do, and just go through the guests for the year.
It's not that close already, is it?
Yeah, seriously, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it is. And then we won't be doing a show on the 25th for obvious reasons, because we'd be both killed.
Stone dead
on the 25th. So we're taking the 25th off, and then we're back up and running, I believe, on the 1st. I'm just going to check the date now.
Well, it will be, yeah. It will be the 1st.
It'll be the 1st.
The 1st of January.
No, Sunday. Hang on. Yeah, the 1st. The 1st.
Yeah.
1st
of January
2017.
What a great way to start off the new year.
Let's just
Listen
hope.
to us.
I know we say this all the time, and we've said it for the last few years. Let's just hope next year is going to be a better year. But maybe it will be. But, it's just frustrating that we want to do so much and we can't, because we don't have the resources to do it. But there you go. What can you do? But anyway, I'm going to finish up for myself, Alan James. Take it easy. And watch the roads there. The old weather's getting bad. It's getting icy out. Just be careful with your driving. By the way, very quickly, I now know why the driving in Ireland's terrible, because in Super Valley the other day, a driving instructor actually parked his car at a 45-degree angle, just screwing up the parking for everybody else. And if he parks like that and he's a driving instructor, then obviously that's where the problem is. That's where we have to start from. Anyway,
yes.
Have a
and
good.
Then there's those people in the aisles in the supermarket as well. I mean, there should be a system in the supermarket where they go down on the left and come up on the right.
Totally
Trolleys
great.
everywhere.
There should be L plates on trolleys.
There should be.
Yeah.
Should be.
So for me, Take it easy. Have a safe week.
Yes, and for myself, Stephen George, it's been absolutely fantastic. Great show this evening. Lots of information, lots to ponder about during the week. And a lot of links have gone up there on the chat room as well. And thanks to everybody who has posted the links. I'm not going to name you all. I'll be here all night. And thanks for everyone who's listening, who just joined us this evening for the show, I suppose, on OYM Radio and also on People's Internet Radio. Speaking of People's Internet Radio, we're going to sever the stream here now on OYM and pass the baton over to Vin on People's Internet Radio. So we'll be back at the same time, same channel next week. Until then, have a fantastic week. From myself, Stephen George, take care. Bye-bye.